certainly trained as a painter, and I'm still looking backwards and wondering how I fell into filmmaking. It's a question I still haven't completely answered. I suppose I must have come across the Nightwatch when I was an art student in London in the mid-1960s. I have to say now, I have to come clean, I have to confess that Rembrandt is not my favorite painter. For you who have seen the film, you will know there's a certain sort of critique going on there. It's a sort of love-hate relationship. But I do think that they say that probably Rembrandt's Nightwatch is the fourth most famous painting in the Western world. The first three, of course, are all Italian. I suppose what's the most famous painting is the Mona Lisa, Da Vinci. The second would probably be The Last Supper, Da Vinci again. And I suppose the whole complex of the Sistine Chapel will be regarded as the third, but then, amazingly, up there in the far, far north, if this is Venice, the city of canals, Amsterdam, of course, city of canals up north, sometimes referred to as the Venice of the north, and very much Rembrandt's city. Supposedly, Rembrandt never ever left Holland and hardly ever left Amsterdam. But it's a very, very Dutch painting. It's about the phenomenon of Dutch solidarity, first European republic, democratic as far as you can understand democracy, the beginning of the 17th century. And as an icon, it's very important in terms of a piece of picture making which is deeply embedded in a long tradition, but for the time in 1642 it was very, very revolutionary. The first film that I ever had at the Venice Film Festival was a movie called A Draftsman's Contract. I don't know whether any of you have seen that, but in a curious way, I suppose Nightwatching replicates some of the ideas of that very, very first film. It's about visual interpretation. And to answer your question, I think it's a Nightwatch by Rembrandt is a mysterious painting. It supposedly has 51 mysteries in it. Why did Rembrandt do this? Why did Rembrandt do that? What does this mean? What does that mean? Etc., etc., etc. And I've always been, I think, in the business of the investigation of the image. This is our 15th feature film, and there's a characteristic, I suppose, in all those feature films, that the primacy of the image seems to me to be most important about cinema. Well, there is something, I suppose, a little unique about the painting. You know, most paintings would have remained in private homes right up until the beginnings when museums became fashionable in the middle of the 19th century. And then we suddenly began, the general public, to investigate all these hundreds and hundreds of images. But it's a curious thing about the Nightwatch that it was almost on public display before the varnish was even dry. So an extraordinary list of people have seen that painting. And it's evoked a huge amount of comment. So, you know, Mussolini has seen the painting. Sorry to choose him as my first Italian. But I mean, Hitler's seen the painting, Churchill's seen the painting, Stendhal, Van Gogh, all the French revolutionary people. It was and has always been for a very, very long time an icon, something that you had to see. In a sense, part of cultural tourism, of course. So if a lot of people have seen it, a lot of people have talked about it. There's huge libraries of books and comments. And so, necessarily, I don't want to make it sound like hard work, but just simply reading and thinking about the painting, there's soon a way in which you become very familiar with it, and you begin to ask questions. Why is that shadow falling on that particular person? Why are there 13 pikes? What's that dog doing? Etc., etc., etc. So maybe we need to find some sort of visual interpretation for that. It's been said, as I remarked, there are 51 mysteries in that painting that somehow or other need, I suppose, interpretation. But let me give you two other examples. All of you must remember Antonioni's blow-up, yes? And you know the plan, you know the scenario of Antonioni's blow-up. You investigate a couple of photographs to find murder and conspiracy. And the other thing, much more to do with reality, you remember the assassination of President Kennedy, the Zabunda tapes. Tape taken by a tourist of the assassination of Kennedy, which seemed to contain evidence of murder and conspiracy. So if you imagine those two sorts of things, which are about visual interpretation, there's certain sort of leads of what we're doing here. very big mystery about Rembrandt. He starts off almost as a sort of Mick Jagger, Bill Gates figure. By the age of 23, his paintings are all over Europe. They're in the court in London, the Venezia in Florence have got copies. There are copies in the Prado in Spain. So he became very, very famous very, very quickly. Earned a lot of money. He painted all the sort of chattering classes, all the nightclub crowd, and became very fashionable. And people sought him out and went to have drinks with him, etc., etc. So very celebrated. And consequently, because of his good art, he became very, very wealthy very, very quickly. But then within 15 years, and 1642, the actual date of the Nightwatch is very significant. 15 years later, he was a pauper, he was bankrupt, and it's always been very, very difficult to explain this riches to rags story, this big dramatic transformation. And of course, there have been lots and lots of theories, but we would like, in this film, to offer you another theory. Well, the film, as you've noticed, is bookended by a dream of blindness and then a reality of blindness. And of course, Rembrandt comes through both of them. And I'm certainly following history and reality. Rembrandt certainly wasn't blinded, and he went on painting till he was 69, which is quite a long life for somebody at that time in that particular place. And there are some lines of optimism, I think, spoke to him by his third consort, Henrique, who suggests, where is the blindness in all this for me? So it's a suggestion, whatever they throw at you, however they treat you, as a great human optimism to continue, to continue, to continue. And I think now Rembrandt's reputation, and I know I'm speaking to an Italian audience, and there's nothing like Italian painting, but I think we can safely say in the year 2007 that probably Rembrandt has been the most successful painting of all European painting activity since the Renaissance. He seems to fit so many bills. He's a Republican, he's democratic, he is a great humanitarian, he doesn't poke fun at people, he's not a misogynist like so much of the painting that surrounded him, and I suppose if you want to use those sort of rather pompous words, he's post-Freudian, he's very interested in the interior man, and also he's very post-modernist. He has a great sense of irony, a great sense of distance. He's not judgmental, he's not making a judgment. So I think he's, in so many ways, absolutely the ideal painter because he represents so many of those things, some of the best things we'd like to think of ourselves. And also, of course, you know, he's not Jackson Pollock. What he paints, you recognize. So the question of figuration, of course, is very, very important. So for all those reasons, I think he's a very, very relevant person to make an examination of. And we do know he lives for another 35 years after the film finishes. So the optimism continues. And of course, think of Bresson. There are films made without music. But in a curious way, I think that a lot of movie making without music is somehow impoverished. The ability of film and music to coexist is a very powerful vehicle. And I've always enjoyed, of course, working with composers. And here we are again with some really great music by an Italian composer. And I think it's most appropriate and most sympathetic. And certainly I would imagine in the future I will continue to see if we can create that particular magic about the association of music and the image. Well, how are you going to react when I say I've always wanted to be a mainstream filmmaker? But of course, I have to add the arrogance on my terms. I cannot possibly make a film for you. How could I do that? How could I make a film for you and you and you and you and you and you? It's impossible. We all share a general informational association, so I'm sure I can communicate with you in general terms. But I cannot provide what you need with your cultural baggage and your interests. But I do think the films are comprehensible, however they are pushed, however they examine the content, however they push the language. And I suppose I'm sitting here now in front of you, and I've made nearly 200 films, and this is our 15th feature film. So I couldn't have done too badly, could I? I mean, I still